the speed, because you set it to transmit at a certain speed, and the speed is sort of way out of the range of that thing. But it's actually running at that speed now, 5,000 kilobits. I'm going to make it slower. So, there'll be less likelihood of it crashing. But it'll still be pretty likely. Okay, so it's running. And this thing's running, yeah. It's 4G and 4 bars is good enough. So we'll just leave it at that.
It's running smoothly.
Yeah. Well, I turned it down to 3,000 kilobits.
Okay.
So it may be able to handle that. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Sure. Hope it's going to be able to run both, It's running because it's running this. Now it's going to see it, yeah. It's going to have to run that too, which is, now it's interrupted because it's too much. We should just leave it as a modem for this and not worry about that.
But if it's broadcast interrupted here, it means no one else can see it.
No, not necessarily.
I'll get my
It's
phone.
only on this thing.
I'll get my phone. It's probably the same thing. It means others who are also doing the same broadcast interrupted.
But it doesn't always work like that. But anyway, get your own phone. Yeah, let's see. Sort of coming and going. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Jai Mother Jesta Hare Krishna Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Hare Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Oops. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Krishna Say Slava Srila Prabhupada.
The quality of the image is good.
It's a miracle. Because we are running off 4G. We're not running off the...
Is better than nothing.
Well, yeah. The alternative is nothing, unfortunately. Because they're doing a whole thing on the network in the temple. But it's working. So, Pradaljayan. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Hare Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Nam Chintamani Ishwari Janave John Sushila Hare Bol Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Jai Nehal Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Jai Michael Hare Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare Jai Bhakti Vinod from Scotland Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Huh? It'd be a good idea, actually.
Looks like you need it from the broadcast.
Really? I don't know.
You were stopping and looked like you're trying to clear your throat or something.
Oh, okay. It's basically all right. Nothing serious. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Well, it seems to be going pretty good, actually. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Ram Hare Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare Rama. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Shatabdi. Agni Dev Sanviya, Haribol. Bhakti Vinod. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare. Jai Chaitali. Oh, Bahut Sundar Ache. Dhanyavad. Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I'm okay, Daksha. Thank you. It's cold here again. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadada Shri Govardhana Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna. Okay. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Hare. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Sholane Hari Bol. Jai Sholane. Jai Raki. Nichikishori. Usha Devi Dasi Hari Bol. Svati. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna. Hari Ram, Hari Ram, Rama Rama, Hari Hari, Hari Krishna, Hari Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hari Hari, Hari Ram, Hari Ram, Ram Ram, Hari Hari, Hari Krishna, Hari Krishna, Krishna, Hari Hari, Hari Ram, Hari Ram, Rama Rama, Hari Hari, Hari Krishna, Hari Krishna, Krishna, Hari Hari, Hari Ram, Hari Ram, Rama Rama, Hari Hari, Hari Krishna, Hari Krishna, Krishna, Hari Hari, Hari Ram, Hari Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Bol Sholem. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.
Guru Maharaj,
Yes. Huh?
it's 7 o'clock. Let's take off.
It's almost 7. Yeah, okay. Nachanayam. Haribol. So, devotees, welcome to our 27th session in our Bhagavad Gita seminar for Bhakti Shastri. Thank you all for coming. We are in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. We just made a start last night. And of course we will continue right now. First of all, let us say some prayers. Namah Vishnupadaya Krishna Presta Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadeshatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchikalpaturubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Yes, so welcome again. And here we go. We're in the 7th chapter. Last night we just began and we went through the first verse in some detail. Very important verse, very significant verse. Seeing from chapter 7 to chapter 12, seeing the subject matter is devotional service and pure devotional service. So in the very first verse of the 7th chapter, Lord Krishna just introduced us very clearly to what is the essence of devotional service, the essence of Krishna consciousness, in a nutshell, as they say. In a nutshell, but you can still say it's all basically there in that first verse. Then we went on to the second verse, and in the second verse, Lord Krishna tells us how he's going to really introduce the subject, in a more detailed sense. He expressed in a nutshell what is devotional service, beginning with touch trinu, just here. We discussed that at some length last night. So what are we going to hear about? Well, we are going to hear about different things, actually. But particularly, the second verse explained that we're going to hear about knowledge of the phenomenal world and knowledge of the numinous world. Phenomenal world means just the regular material world. We all know it so well. Numinous, it's a little bit of an esoteric term. It's not a commonly used term in your average person's vocabulary, but it basically means anything spiritual. Anything spiritual. So what might that include? Well, it includes us. We are spirit souls. It would include the spiritual world. It's very spiritual, completely. And devotees. Listen to this. It includes Krishna himself. Yes. When we talk about spiritual things, particularly if we talk about the whole range of spiritual things, Krishna is there. So that second verse then just briefly introduced about what Krishna wants us to hear. Well, not just wants us, but what Krishna is going to explain to us. He's going to explain those things. Yes. What's the material world? How does it function? The three modes, the different species, different types of material consciousness, material attitudes, lust, anger, greed. And then everything spiritual, process of devotional service, the nature of the soul, Satchitananda, the nature of the spiritual world, what goes on there. And then the nature of Krishna himself. Who is he? What is he? What does he do? How does he think? How does he feel? All these things. So that was introduced in the second verse. And so now we go into the third verse, which is actually the last verse in a subsection. You know, we've divided these chapters up into different sections. And, well, in fact, this is not a subsection. The first three verses are just a whole section in and of itself, which we've titled Knowing Krishna by Hearing About Him, verse 1 to 3. And then, so 3 is there also. Let us read 3, and then we'll go on to the second section. So this is another fairly famous, it's a famous verse, definitely a famous verse, and an important verse in Bhagavad Gita. Out of many thousands among men, one may endeavor for perfection, and of those who have achieved perfection, hardly one knows me in truth. So Krishna here, of course, he is referring to that knowledge which he has just introduced in verse 2, the phenomenal knowledge or knowledge of the material world, the numinous knowledge means the transcendental spiritual knowledge which is beyond the limitations of this world. So here in verse 3, this whole idea of coming to understand, coming to the level of perfection on the basis of knowledge, understanding, is being presented here, verse 3. And of course the basic idea is, it's not so simple. Don't take it lightly. It's deep. It's a very special subject matter. It's something most extraordinary. And so here, though, 3 types, and you could say 3 levels of persons are being referred to, being described, or not described really, but mentioned. First of all, there's 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 four really, I suppose. There's just everyone, first of all. Just out of so many people, loads of people, one may endeavor for perfection. Now, what does that mean, perfection? Well, in this context here, this perfection that out of many thousands of people, just one of them may endeavor for, is impersonal realization. To realize we're not these bodies, to realize, not just as an idea, but to realize in concrete terms that actually I'm an eternal spirit soul. That's what I am. So out of many thousands of people, very few try for that. And then out of however many achieve that realization of the soul distinct from the body, that we are actually eternal transcendental persons. So out of those who have achieved it, hardly one knows Krishna properly. So to understand Krishna, to know Krishna, because knowledge, the basis of what is being presented here is knowledge, realization, understanding, that sort of idea. Yeah, so out of those who somehow manage to achieve impersonal realization, you'll hardly find one who knows Krishna. In other words, who is a real devotee, even ultimately a pure and perfect devotee who actually knows Krishna very clearly. Yes, so, some people say that this knowledge of Krishna consciousness is very simple, it's just for simple people. You probably know that when Lord Chaitanya was in Varanasi, he was taking the Sankirtan movement out into the streets of the town. But the Mayavadi impersonalist sannyasis who were living there, many of them, they didn't appreciate that, because Lord Chaitanya, in distributing the holy names, the Harinam Sankirtan, he was dealing with everyone, including not just men, but women and children. Traditionally for sannyasis, particularly impersonalist sannyasis, they don't deal with women and children. Yeah, so Lord Chaitanya was, and Prakashananda Saraswati, big impersonalist, accused him that, what are you doing? You shouldn't do that. Yeah. So like this, he thought, Prakashananda thought that, this Krishna consciousness is just for anyone and everyone. It's like for common people, even uneducated people. So it's not to be taken seriously. And of course we know here and there, but anyway, the thing is that after Prakashananda had presented like that to Lord Chaitanya, then Lord Chaitanya debated with him and completely defeated him. And so Prakashananda and his followers, they became disciples or followers of Lord Chaitanya. Yes. So in other words, people may think, they just chant and dance in the streets. What is that? It's not to be taken seriously. But actually, in Krishna consciousness, there's such a deep philosophy. It's not so simple. And we read in different places. Here in Bhagavad Gita, for example, there's one verse we're going to come across it, I think, next week. If I remember correctly, it's the 8th chapter. Mam tu veda na kaschana. Krishna says that I know everything that's happened in the past, everything that's happening now, everything that will happen in the future. Plus, I also know all living entities. But me, nobody knows. Nobody knows. So to understand Krishna properly, clearly, nicely, well, Krishna, as we will read as we go through this chapter even, Krishna, you could say, reserves the right not to be exposed to anyone, doesn't matter who, anyone who he doesn't want to be exposed to. Yeah. Krishna is always self-manifest. You cannot force Krishna to come in front of you, to be visible to you, even just to accept your service. You can't force him. Yes. Mam tu vedana kaschana. Krishna remains mysterious, as he likes. And then it's also, it's in this chapter, yeah. It's in this chapter. Samahatma sadurlabaha. Anyone who really comes to understand me. This is the 7th chapter, verse 19. Anyone who comes to understand me nicely, Samahatma, that great person, Sadurlabaha, is very rare. Yeah. So really, ultimately, only the devotees can know the Lord. No one else can know the Lord. And it's just by his mercy that he allows the devotees to understand him at all also. So yeah, so this is important here. And that finishes the first section, how we can know Krishna by hearing about him. And for those of you who are doing the Bhakti Shastri, we have a special question here for you, which we want you to note. It's based on this verse, chapter 7, verse 3. And what is it now? It's from a class. Oh, it's a class. A class by Srila Prabhupada on Srimad Bhagavatam 1, 2, 6. First Canto, chapter 2, verse 6. Let me just read a few sentences here. Prabhupada says, out of many thousands of people, millions of people, Sahasranam. Sahasranam means many thousand times thousands, many millions. So a man tries to become Siddha. Siddha means perfect. What is that perfection? The perfection means to stop this repetition of birth, death, old age, and disease. This is perfection. This is perfection. So, what we want you to note there is, how does Prabhupada describe perfection? What is perfection? And it means to stop this repetition of birth, death, old age, and disease. So we go on to the second section, which is from verse 4 to verse 12, and it actually has a few, I think there's maybe 3 or something like that, subsections. First subsection is verse 4 and verse 5 together, these 2 verses. And the idea behind these two verses is, well, first of all, the overall section from verse 4 to verse 12 we call knowing Krishna as the source of all material and spiritual energies. And the subsection from verse 4 to verse 5, which we're going to read right now, is called there are two energies at play in the world, material and spiritual. Both are Krishna's. Yes. So, as we've done before, I'll read both of the verses, and then we'll go back and talk a bit about each one. So, verse 4, and remember, the whole context here is this knowledge of that which is material and that which is spiritual. That knowledge, and of course, because Krishna is just beginning the explanation, so they're just beginning descriptions, beginning explanations, just introducing these subjects. What is the material world? What is the spiritual world? So, therefore, in this verse 4, Lord Krishna introduces the material world. What is it made of? On the sort of the most basic level, the most simple level, what is the material world composed of? What is it made of? What is it? So here's verse 4. And again, it's also a famous verse. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. Altogether, these 8 constitute my separated material energies. Now, in the purport, if we look through the purport of verse 4, we'll see that Srila Prabhupada, of course, here in the verse, he's just talked about these 8. They're like the most basic. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. Excuse me. I meant just to read verse 4 and then read verse 5. So, verse 4 then is just introducing what is the material world on the simplest level. And verse 5 is introducing, you could say, what is spirit, also in a very introductory way. So here's verse 5. Besides these, O mighty armed Arjuna, there's another superior energy of mind, which comprises the living entities who are exploiting the resources of this material, inferior nature. So let's go back to verse 4. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, false ego. Altogether, these 8 constitute my separated material energies. So, So Srila Prabhupada, we were saying, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada actually sort of takes the whole discussion a step further back. Means in terms of describing what is the material world, how's it working, and what's going on, and even who's in charge. Prabhupada, rather than just talk about this earth, water, fire, air, ether, they're just the basic building blocks that make up the material world, and every type of, like every planet and the body of every living entity. Rather than just go straight into that, Srila Prabhupada goes back to explain a bit about how it comes about. And you'll see if you look at the first paragraph of the purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about the three Vishnus. Vishnos tu trini rupani means that that Vishnu exists in three forms. And I'm sure you're familiar with these things. First of all, there's Mahavishnu, then who is the Lord of the whole material creation, from whose exhalation the living entities are placed in the material world, and out of the pores of his body the universes come. So he is the Lord of the whole material world. Then second one is Garbhadakshay Vishnu, and he's in each universe. He's the Lord of each universe, independently. And then there's Kshirodakshay Vishnu, who is in the heart of every living entity, even in every atom for that matter. And basically, you can say, he is the Lord of the living entities. He's managing the living entities. So Srila Prabhupada introduces this. This is all part of the process of creation, which ends up at the point where you get these 8 separated material energies, which are then assembled into the different forms we see in material life. Yes, and so Srila Prabhupada goes on then. Prabhupada goes on, let's just have a look, see what does Prabhupada do. Yeah, okay, so we just jump over to the third paragraph. And here in the third paragraph, Prabhupada talks about these 8 elements. And then he talks further about different specific things. These 8 elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, false ego, they're 8 specific factors in the material world. But they are not alone. There are other, like, basic components in the material world. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. So if you look there in that last paragraph, Prabhupada talks about, he says, the principal manifestations are 8, they're in the verse. Out of these, the first 5 are the gross elements, within which the 5 sense objects are included. So what are they? They are, next sentence, sound, touch, form, taste, and smell. And Prabhupada says, material science comprises these 10 items and nothing more. But actually then there's mind, intelligence, and false ego. Generally the materialists, even the psychologists, they don't recognize these 3 aspects of the sort of psychological part of life. Yes, and then, so Prabhupada explains what is this false ego, a false sense of what I am. Then there's the 10, we read about the 5 sense objects, sound, touch, form, taste, and smell. Then Prabhupada talks about the 10 sense organs, the eyes, the ears, etc. And then Prabhupada says, therefore, from these 8, the first 8, from the verse itself, are manifest the 24 elements of the material world. Yes. All right, so now we go on to verse 5. Before we do that, we have a little quotation from Srila Prabhupada, from a class by Srila Prabhupada on this very verse in 1974, chapter 7, verse 4. Srila Prabhupada says, Binna means separated. Because Krishna in the verse, talking about these 8, Krishna said, Binna prakritir ashtada. Ashtada meaning 8, prakriti meaning energy, and binna means separated. The 8 separated material energies. So Prabhupada says, an example is when I speak into the tape recorder. When you replay the tape recorder, you hear my voice, but it is not me. It is my separated energy. With my energy I have spoken. I have vibrated some sound, and it is recorded on the tape. When it is played back, it produces exactly the same sound, but it is separated from me. Try to understand. This material world is just like that. Binna, separate. Real life is in the spiritual world. And these energies, the external energy, Krishna says, are separated. Separated means you cannot perceive Krishna directly from this energy. Wow, that's good, isn't it? That's just amazing. So verse 5. So verse 4, the material world, the most basic sort of composition. What is the material world? Now verse 5, in one sense, what is the most basic understanding of the spiritual level, at least particularly in relation to us. Besides these, O mighty armed Arjuna, there's another superior energy of mine, which comprises the living entities who are exploiting the resources of this material inferior nature. So the first, in verse 4, those things, those 8 energies, they're Krishna's energies. And here, in verse 5, the spiritual energies, the spiritual living beings, they're Krishna's superior energies. They're also Krishna's energies. So the living entities, that's you and me, devotees, we are spiritual. Actually, we're said to be marginal, in between the higher spiritual energy and the lower material energy. Actually, the fact is that in terms of our composition, we are made of spiritual energy, Sat Chit Ananda. But we have marginal tendencies. We can stay in spiritual life, we can go into material life. We can leave material life, go back to spiritual life. But actually, we are spiritual by nature. And we're trying to exploit the resources of the material nature, but devotees, even though we are of a higher, superior nature than dead matter, and even though we're trying to exploit it and use it in so many ways, but we are under the control of it. And therefore, just as one example, therefore, when our bodies which are made up of earth, water, fire, air, and ether, when our bodies feel they want to do something, generally we do it. In so many cases, we do what our body tells us to do. Look at that. Listen to this. Eat that. Talk about this. Yeah, we are following the dictations of our bodies, following the dictations of the inferior material energy a lot. And therefore we're entangled here, and we can't get out. At least until you become a devotee, you definitely can't get out. And they don't even know that you should get out. Oh, the situation is pathetic. All right. But then, of course, when one through Krishna consciousness makes progress and starts to realize one's actual eternal nature, then you become free from the control of the material energy. So we go on now to the second subsection here. It is verses 6 and 7, and we call this, Krishna is the origin of all this, so there's no truth higher than him. Krishna is the origin of all these things, therefore there's no truth higher than him. Verses 6 and 7. So let's just read these two verses. All created beings have their source in these two natures. Of all that is material and all that is spiritual in this world, know for certain that I am both the origin and dissolution. And verse 7, O conqueror of wealth, there is no truth superior to me. Everything rests upon me as pearls are strung on a thread. Yes, so Krishna is the origin. And because he's the origin, there's nothing higher than him. So, all right, verse 6, all created beings have their source in these two natures. Of all that is material and all that is spiritual in this world, know for certain that I am both the origin and dissolution. So, it's sort of a relatively simple point that within this material world, everything in the material world is basically a combination of matter and spirit. Every living entity, you, me, we're eternal spirit souls. But we're in these material bodies which tend to dominate us a lot. So therefore, in that sense, everything, so many things in this material world are existing effectively as combinations of matter and spirit. And Prabhupada makes the point that just as this body, our bodies, develop because of the presence of the soul, similarly the universe, the universal body, develops because of the presence of the super soul. Yes. And verse 7, O conqueror of wealth, there's no truth superior to me. Everything rests upon me as pearls are strung on a thread. And this is another fairly famous verse, and it's very nice. It's just a very beautiful and very clear way of us for us to understand what is the position here in this world, and how is everything related to Krishna, who is the origin and the dissolution of everything. So the thing is that Lord Krishna in the verse gives a very nice example. The example of pearls being strung on a thread, and they're resting on the thread, and they're dependent on the thread. If the thread is removed, then they just fall and they just go anywhere and everywhere. But now they're on the thread. Oh, they look very nice. It's all very organized and systematic. So similarly, Krishna is the sustaining principle of everything within this world. He is supporting everything, empowering everything, giving every living entity whatever capabilities they have. In this way, supporting the living entities completely. But the thing is that just like the thread, so he's like the thread which has the pearls strung on it and which is supporting the pearls. The problem is you can't see the thread. So within this world, the problem is you can't see Krishna. People cannot see Krishna. Just like you cannot see the thread supporting the whole string of pearls. And therefore the people, it's a simple point, but the people, because they cannot see Krishna supporting, they think he's not there. And they think the pearls are just themselves hanging there in a nice way. This is ignorance. Imagine someone thinking like that some string of jewelry is just hanging there on its own accord. Obviously, it's childish, or even less than childish. So yes, if Krishna was not supporting everything, everything would just collapse. So now the third section is verse 8 to verse 11. And here, Krishna gives some specific examples to help us achieve Maya Sakta Mana. That your mind must be attached to me. He gives some examples from this world of things which in many cases we can see, at least we can experience in one way or another through our senses. And they're examples of Krishna's presence, Krishna supporting. They're examples of Krishna's energy within this world. And they're all extremely basic, fundamental things. In other words, having told us that everything is strung on him, Krishna will now explain how, and will give us examples of things which are strung on him. And one little point we should note, just as a point, is that Krishna says, with these different examples from verse 8 to verse 11, he says that I am this, I am that. But really, it's not exactly that these things are directly Krishna, the person, but they are displays of his energies, and his energies, of course, are not different from him. Just like the light of the sun, the heat of the sun, is not different from the sun. It's just part of the existence of the sun. But still, the sun is way away, and the heat and the light is down here and wherever we happen to be. So, the energy and the energetic, there's oneness, but there's also some separation. So let's read these 4 verses, and you'll see that here Krishna is saying that I am this, I am that, I am these different things, or like we just said, they're Krishna's energy. But these things are basically the most fundamental parts of the existence of the material world. Yes, the most general things in the material world. Okay, so we'll read the verses 8 to 11. O son of Kunti, I'm the taste of water, the light of the sun and the moon, the syllable Om in the Vedic mantras. I'm the sound and ether and ability in man. 9. I'm the original fragrance of the earth, and I'm the heat and fire. I'm the life of all that lives, and I am the penances of all ascetics. 10. O son of Prita, know that I am the original seed of all existences, the intelligence of the intelligent, and the prowess of all powerful men. I am the strength of the strong, devoid of passion and desire. I am sex life, which is not contrary to religious principles, O Lord of the Bharats, Arjuna. So just see, as we mentioned, all these things listed out by Krishna in these 4 verses, they are just about the most basic, fundamental, foundational features of life in this world. What was the first? I am the taste of water. What could be more basic and essential to existence for all living entities other than water? I am the light of the sun and the moon. Without the sun particularly, it would be just like if there was no water. If there was no sun, everyone would be dead. Everyone would be dead. And even the moon gives flavor to the vegetables. I'm the syllable Om in the Vedic mantras. Om, of course, Hare Krishna, that's another thing. But in a certain sense, the syllable Om is like the basic, at least you could say, ritualistic, ceremonial mantra or sound vibration. I'm the sound and ether. Just like we were explaining yesterday, we have to hear. We have to hear. Without hearing, you could say, pretty much forget about being Krishna conscious. And I'm ability in man. The humans are the ones who have the abilities. And those abilities make life in the material world something extraordinary. So, I can just mention one famous example given by Prabhupada, which I imagine many of you have heard of. Srila Prabhupada, it was the very early days in 26 Second Avenue, New York. Prabhupada one evening was giving class. Who should come in but 2 drunkards who were, they call them winos. They specialize in drinking wine, not just anything or beer or whatever, but they specialize in drinking wine, and they're just intoxicated all the time. So these 2 winos came in, and they were really quite intoxicated. And they started making a little disturbance, a little noise when they came in, talking loudly. One of them had a roll of toilet paper, and he came walking in right, if you're familiar with 26 Second Avenue, which I think many of you are not. An interesting little fact about 26 Second Avenue is the toilet is right next to where Prabhupada would sit and give classes. It's just sort of, that's the place. It's almost at the end of the room, in the middle of the room. Interesting. So anyway, this fellow came in drunk with a roll of toilet paper, went into the toilet, put the toilet paper on the little fitting, and left it there so people could use it, and went out with his friend, and they left. So Srila Prabhupada, the devotees, some of the devotees were a bit, even angry and wanted to kind of get rid of these fellows. But Prabhupada told them, no, just relax. And then Prabhupada said, just see, even though this man, Prabhupada said, even though this man is not all right, he's not all right, but see, he has done some service for Krishna by giving this toilet paper and setting it up in the toilet room. And then Prabhupada said very extraordinary thing. Even if someone is drinking wine, if they just think the taste of this wine is Krishna, they will become Krishna conscious. Prabhupada said that. Oh, Prabhupada, what an amazing person. But you see, these things, Krishna is saying, I am the taste of water. What could be more basic than water or the light of the sun? There's nothing more basic. And then in verse 9, I'm the original fragrance of the earth, the heat and fire. I'm the life of all that lives and the penances of all ascetics. Again, these are very basic, foundational aspects of existence in this world. Even the penances of ascetics, like so many people, maybe some of you, are going to work tomorrow. Is that not an austerity? Is that not an austerity? Of course it is. And Krishna is the essence of all austerities. And Prabhupada makes the point. Here it is. Let me read this. It's a comment by Prabhupada. It's very interesting. Listen to this. The same manure, when someone is doing some gardening, the same manure, the same water, the same gardener, but different flowers have different perfumes. Did you think about that? It's the same everything, but when the different flowers come, they have different fragrances. Therefore, it's answered in Bhagavad Gita that nature is not all in all. Nature cannot work independently. There is control by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. He rules that each kind of seed will produce a particular kind of flower or flavor. We fools cannot explain this. We ask, what is this nature? There must be intelligence behind nature. Otherwise, how could a rose flower, why could a rose flower so beautifully? Even from an artistic point of view, if you want to paint one flower, it takes so much effort, so many colors, so many materials. And even then, you cannot make one lifelike rose. So, this is Krishna then, behind all of this. O son of Prita, this is now 10. O son of Prita, know that I'm the original seed of all existences. Again, so foundational. The intelligence of the intelligent and the prowess of all powerful men. So Krishna is the root of everything, and all these things are his energy. Yes. And verse 11, I'm the strength of the strong, devoid of passion and desire. I'm sex life, which is not contrary to religious principles, O Lord of the Bharats. And of course, reproduction, it's another thing. How can you get more basic, more foundational? What a foundational factor in life in the material world. So this is what Krishna's doing here, giving these examples to illustrate, to show us how Krishna is there. He is the basis of material life, and even on the spiritual level, he's the basis there also. And finally, a summary in verse 12. And the idea in verse 12 is that everything's like that. Everything is one and different from Krishna. Know that all states of being, be they of goodness, passion, or ignorance, are manifested by my energy. I am, in one sense, everything, but I am independent. I am not under the modes of material nature, for they, on the contrary, are within me. So again, Krishna's emphasizing that it's all his energy, he's behind it. They're all displays of his potencies in so many different ways. But it's his energy, it's not him personally. All these things are manifested, he says, by my energy. I am in one sense everything, but I'm independent. And not under the modes, but everything's under me. So it's Krishna again, Prabhupada points out, making all of this very clear. Everything's going on under the modes. Prabhupada in the purport gives the example of not now, but in previous days, in so many countries in the world, the king was above the law. The king could do anything, and no action could be taken against him. I mean, of course, people might have a revolution if he got too carried away, but in terms of the law, the laws did not apply to the king. Now, of course, nowadays it doesn't work so much like that. I mean, it works to some degree. Just see Mr. Trump. He's sort of, not really under the law. Anyway, but Krishna is not under the control of those things which control the other living beings. All the living entities are being controlled by birth, death, old age, disease, the three modes of material nature, time. They're all being controlled by these things, but not Krishna. He is not controlled by these things. Yes, so there you go. This is very nice. Hare Krishna. So we will continue from verse 13 tomorrow night. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Shri Radha Radhanath, Shri Giri Govardhan, Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai.